In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Tonight is our 28th class, our Orthodox Survival course. This is our second class on the book Nihilism by Father Seraphim Rose, or who at the time when he wrote it was Eugene Rose, a layman. And tonight we're going to read part of Chapter 2, the stages of the nihilist dialectic. As I said last week, I wasn't sure how long it's going to take us to get through this, and when I was working on the notes today, spending a few hours studying this and working through this, we were able to produce 5 pages of notes on just the first 2 stages of the nihilist dialectic. Father Seraphim identified 4 stages: liberalism, what he called liberalism, realism, vitalism, and then destructive nihilism, nihilism of destruction, the ultimate, you might say, nihilism. And tonight we're going to talk about stages 1 and 2, liberalism and realism. I do have a hard copy of the book this week, and I do have page numbers in the notes as well as paragraph numbers. The paragraph numbers refer to the paragraph within that section. So in the introduction section, there are so many paragraphs, 5 paragraphs. In the liberalism section, I give the page numbers, but also within the liberalism section, I give the paragraph numbers, and start over again with the realism section with paragraph numbers. So if you're reading the book online, you can go by the paragraph numbers. If you're reading hard copy, also you can refer to the page numbers at the beginning of each section. In the very first section here, the introduction, the author points out there's a unified nihilist mentality, but it has different manifestations. It's all these 4 stages are really 4 manifestations, or 4 schools of thought related to a few basic shared beliefs,
like
realities.
The demons have different shapes.
Yes, the demons have different. They put on different masks. They have different. Or they're all demons, but they're all serving the devil. They're all following the same program, more or less, but they have different manifestations. And it's advanced on different fronts. So this revolution, or this nihilistic overturning of everything, is moving on different fronts. And he's divided it into 4 stages. Roughly, we could identify 4 historical periods where one front or one type of nihilism is more prominent, or seems to be the most powerful or the most evident. And in a way, it's a change from one stage to another. So that's why he uses the word stages, which indicates a chronological progression. But at the same time, we recognize that these stages overlap, and that some stages appear out of time, you might say earlier than the evolutionary process would indicate. For example, the most obvious example is the French Revolution, which is nihilism of destruction, which he identifies as the last stage. But then we know that from our study of the 19th century, there was a reaction pushing back the French Revolution. And so what took center stage for a while in the 19th century is what he calls the first stage of nihilism, which is liberalism, or to make that more specific and more precise, today we should call it classic liberalism, or 19th century liberalism. So this nihilism having different stages, different faces, different heads of the hydra, this confuses people trying to oppose it. It might confuse us. We're trying to oppose it. And you're trying to oppose this nihilism. Then you see this face of nihilism that seems nicer or friendlier. Say, well, I guess I'll identify with that. I'll enjoy that. For example, I talk to Orthodox people who enjoy watching like some so-called conservative talk shows or things like that, or listening to that. And they say, well, this is much better than the far left Democrats and so forth. And I say, yes, that's true. But you have to realize this is another face of the revolution. This is another head of the hydra. And so even though you may say, well, yes, practically I'll vote for this more conservative quote-unquote guy rather than the other one, you have to realize that this is just an earlier stage or a less lethal stage, but nevertheless part of the same program.
I understand.
I've won over some people to understand they have to advance to a more orthodox and a more precise, and more informed understanding of what's going on. So they don't just caught in the American false dialectic of Democrat versus Republican or conservative versus liberal and so forth. So one stage, in a sense, prepares for the next, or leads to the next. But on the other hand, we have to recognize that the later stage incorporates the error of the previous age. So these are errors piled on errors. They incorporate the previous error. And these two schools of error, or four schools of error, might criticize each other. But remember, that's like the demons talking in our heads to each other. We could have 10 demons trying to talk in our heads, and they seem to be contradicting each other, but they're all demons. See? And so all these different schools of error might debate, criticize. You can fill a library with Marxist critiques of liberal history, or liberal critiques of Marxist history. But they're all people in error criticizing each other. And the Orthodox view is above in all these views and is true. It's the true view. So we have to, as I've been saying frequently through our course, we have to stay on our Orthodox vantage point and look down on all this. Right? We have to have our Orthodox lens through which we see all this and not get caught up in emotional or violent identification with an error that might seem or is less on the surface, less pernicious than a more advanced error, but is nevertheless part of the complex of errors. So the proponents of the previous stage may oppose or appear to oppose the next stage. They're posing as the conservatives of that day. G.K. Chesterton, the English Catholic writer, made a quip. Well, he made a lot of jokes. He has a lot of great one-liners, but he said, the progressives, the liberals, are the people who make the changes, and the conservatives conserve the changes. The previous changes. So at every step, the so-called conservatives are just conserving the old errors. The progressives are always making new errors, and the conservatives are conserving the old errors. See, so that's their job in the process. At every stage, there are partial truths. Okay, so remember, there's no such thing as absolute untruth. Like there's no such thing as absolute evil. There's no such thing as absolute untruth. You could read a Marxist critique of capitalist economics. You could say, well, yeah, there are some correct insights. If there were no truths, no partial insights, nothing that rang true, then none of these schools of thought would seduce people. Right? They had to seduce people by gradually introducing partial truths that became more and more untrue as time went on. Right? In other words, greater and greater untruths. The old ones didn't become more untrue; they're always untrue. But greater and greater untruths. But starting out with small little lies, and then advancing to the bigger lies. That's how they seduce people and get them to cooperate with their program.
The cheese in the trap.
The cheese in the trap. That's right. And then you move the cheese a little bit, and and the little victims keep following, right? The groups pretend to criticize each other, but no so-called mainstream criticism ever gets at the root of the problem. When you get at the root of the problem, they tell you you're not mainstream, you're a fringe, you're too radical, you're living in the past, or something like that. If you go at the root of the problem. Okay. So Father Seraphim identifies the four stages. In paragraph 2, he names the four stages. That's on page 21 in the book. By the way, this is the second edition of the book. I think we all own the second edition of the book, which has an additional essay on the philosophy of the absurd at the end, which we're not going to spend time on, but absurdism is part and parcel, of course, of nihilism. I think in Romania you had one of the most famous absurdists, the playwright Ionescu. Yes. So Father Seraphim identifies these four stages as liberalism, realism, vitalism, and destruction, or nihilism of destruction, just out-and-out nihilism, just the consistent nihilism of just destroying everything, not pretending to have a positive program, but just destroying everything. Right. This term liberalism, right now in 2018, this term liberalism needs to be identified precisely. Today, and if you're watching television or reading the press, they say, well, the Democrats and the leftists are the liberals and the Republicans are the conservatives. Right? At best, the Republicans are classical liberals, at best. Okay, they're classical liberals. The Democrats today are just the Satanists or destroyers, right? They're just out there in the streets, funding Antifa and riots and transgenderism and the whole program of just overt destruction, right? They're just into overt destruction. So they're really not, today's so-called leftists or so-called liberals are not liberals, they're just nihilists or, I'd say, hardcore Marxist destroyers. And the so-called conservatives, about the most conservative you'll find would be people that we should identify as classical liberals, 19th century liberals, are about as conservative as it gets in today's American political spectrum. So who are these conservatives? Who are these liberals? The height of liberalism, its high tide, its apex is the height of the middle of the 19th century, the Victorian era in England and in Europe. Okay? The liberals were those who taught, they were optimistic about the progress of man, but at the same time, they wanted to conserve the good things from what they would call Christian civilization.
Without God.
Without God. Or with a very tame God. I mean, God's there, but he's the God of deism, the God who's off somewhere, but doesn't interfere with things, doesn't interfere with our program to improve the world. Another term for classical liberals are simply what today are called libertarians. The idea that if you just leave people alone, take away all the old rules, take away all the old boundaries, take away all the old authorities, let people just interact and do business with each other and fulfill their potential, all will go well. So it was the liberals in politics in the 19th century, the liberals who gradually removed all the authority of the kings in peaceful ways through establishing constitutional monarchy, and usually in peaceful ways. There were revolutionaries who enacted violent revolution, but in the so-called advanced countries or more democratic countries, it was basically the liberals who established a program of universal suffrage, the income tax, compulsory public education, which are all actually aspects of Marx's Communist Manifesto. But it was done under the auspices of the liberals, saying this is good for people and we're making progress.
If you tell them they're communists, they are like, what's that?
What are you talking about? Yeah, tell people who believe in the income tax they're communists.
We lived in communism.
Yeah, you lived in communism.
I know what's that.
Yeah, compulsory public education.
Yeah, we see it.
Compulsory public education, destroying private property through getting people into debt and taxes and so forth. This is all part of the Marxist program. But in the 19th century, this is enacted under progressivist or liberal auspices, right? They were helping the masses. They were lifting up the oppressed classes through liberal legislation. And they were establishing, instead of monarchy, constitutional monarchy. Right? The power was not from God to the king, but it was from the people, supposedly from the people. So liberalism was at its height in the middle of the 19th century. Realism, which we could also call determinist materialism, or radical philosophical materialism, or scientism, he identifies the height of its public cachet, so to speak, in the latter half of the 19th century. That's the high tide of the triumph of Darwinism and that kind of thing. And then vitalism, the last quarter of the 19th century up to World War I. Vitalism was a movement of they were kind of bored with this crude scientific materialisms. They wanted to recapture the idea of the human spirit.
Colonies.
Pardon me?
Colonies.
The colonies?
Africa.
And so forth. Yes, that's right. These are people interested in the savage races. They were bored with being uptight Victorian Europeans. They wanted to go rediscover their animal nature, right, by hanging out with the Orientalists and the Africanists. The novels, very degenerate literature associated with people like E.M. Forster, focused on this exploration, the bored Englishmen exploring more vital cultures where they're in touch with their animal instincts. And this also, vitalism affected even military thinking. For example, the French, leading up to World War I, the French had a disastrous, suicidal concept of the offensive outrance, the total offensive with no thought of defensive or logistical considerations, based on the concept of the élan vital, that the French, and it was also a racialist concept, we French have greater élan, we have greater courage, we have greater vital energy than the Germanic race. And so we will defeat them. We're going to wear red, we're going to keep wearing our bright red pants and doing cavalry and infantry charges against entrenched German machine gun emplacements, because our élan vital will overcome their technology, which of course is absurd, right? It's ridiculous. But people, as they say, when you stop believing in the real God, you'll believe anything. So these are all a whole number of ridiculous mini ideologies sprang out of this one trunk of the denial of Christian truth. That's vitalism, and we were discussing last week the apostle of vitalism is a philosopher named Henri Bergson. Henri is a French name, but he wasn't exactly French. He taught at the University of Paris, and he had this concept. He was an evolutionist, but he taught this mystical concept of evolution, in which the élan vital is incarnated in each successive stage of the evolutionary process, and it's an unstoppable process moving forward, where life leaps on the back of non-life, and then more complex life leapfrogs over that, and then animals, and then man, and then of course ultimately there's something beyond man, right? There's a transhuman or a superman that comes after that. Pardon me?
Cyborgs.
So, well, Bergson thought it would just be an evolutionary process, right? Or he said he did. Who knows what he really thought? It's a good living.
The fourth industrial revolution.
Unfortunately, a lot of young Orthodox, the cream of Orthodox young people, intellectuals, were attracted to Europe at this period. And they were sitting in Bergson's lectures, they were sitting in all these lectures, and they were bringing this crazy stuff back, right, to their own country. But that's a topic when we're going to talk about the Orthodox nations and their our situation, right, in the 20th century and then the 21st century. And then there's finally the out and out nihilism of destruction. Let's just destroy it. Let's just destroy everything, because that's the ultimate end of all this. This is what's portrayed in the Possessed, or the Demons, by Dostoevsky, right? Just the out and out nihilists who just say, yeah, we just hate everybody and everything. We're just demonic, and we're going to enjoy killing everybody and destroying everything. And that's incarnated in the frenzy of destruction in the 20th century, right? World wars, revolutions, millions of people being killed by their own governments. It's a demonic frenzy. Why would, other than a demonic impulse, why would you annihilate 60 million people in Russia? Why would you annihilate 90 million people in China? It's demonic. No earthly evil can explain this kind of thing. But it is linked to, in the public face, though, is linked to these so-called philosophical positions. And if you get enough people believing this stuff, they're going to go along with it. Right? They're going to go along with it because I'd like to coin a phrase. I've been thinking a lot about this and thinking about problems within Orthodoxy. And I'm going to coin the phrase, homology begets ontology. Homology, Homology. That's from the Greek homologia, what you profess, what you believe. It's a theological way of expressing ideas of consequences. Okay? So what you believe begets or creates who you are. It changes who you are. It's like Weaver says, ideas have consequences. So if you get enough people to believe these bad ideas, it changes how they function, how they live together, ultimately what they are. Okay? We know that theologically, our homologia, our confession of faith, changes us. Ontologically, grace changes us. It transforms us. Right? When we confess the faith, we say the creed 3 times at our baptism. We go in the font, come out 3 times. We're changed. That confession of faith changes us. And to deny your faith, if you become an apostate, That's not just those aren't just words, right? And it changes who you are on the inside. It changes what you are. Okay? So this brainwashing over generations of all the formerly Christian peoples of Europe and America, it's actually changed what they are. Their homology begat their negative, or their giving up their homology, their homologia, their confession of the faith, begat a new negative ontology, what they are.
But nowadays, the general, the mental state is very, very low.
Yes.
So you cannot change it.
The intellectual state is very low, so you have to go straight to the heart. You have to bypass the rational function
Exactly.
and go straight to their instinct of, and hope that God's grace touches their hearts.
So, I mean, also how the enemy works.
Yeah.
They
Well-
also go straight to their soul.
They go straight to their souls, which is why we have to fight with spiritual weapons. That's right.
They don't think anymore.
Right, but people who do have rational function left, we have to reach them. That's why the purpose of our course is to reach our faithful who still have their rational functions, are still working, because we still need to retain, to preserve, save some kind of elite who will have a rational understanding. Otherwise, we won't have any leadership. Yeah, that's why it's important to preserve our children and preserve their minds, so we have some future, some rational people left who can provide a rational leadership. Okay. So in paragraph 3 of the introduction, Father Seraphim points out that the stages overlap, and representatives of each kind can be found in every stage. So in the French Revolution, you can find one of each kind. Right? In the mid-19th century in France or Germany or Russia, you can find one of each kind. See? Even today, in 2018, we still have liberals, we still have realists, we still have vitalists, even though we're well past the era when the nihilism of destruction took center stage with the big wars and the big violent revolutions. Okay. He also points out how, even though these errors, he identifies these errors as having their root in the French Revolution in the 19th century, but he points out they have precedents. Remember, there's no such thing as really a new idea. They're always recycling old bad ideas. So he says each kind of nihilism has historical precedent, that liberalism has roots in Renaissance humanism. The liberals are very into being humanistic. Man is the center of all things. The beauty of human achievement, the beauty of human culture, and so forth and so on. Which seems beautiful, right? It's attractive. It's not destructive. It's beautiful and it's attractive. Everybody admires Renaissance art and architecture and music and so forth. Right? Man is the center of all things. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, on and on. And the liberals of the 19th century recycle all this in their own way. Okay. Realism, or scientism, or scientific determinism, philosophical materialism, all terms we could equate with so-called realism, has roots in the Reformation and the Enlightenment. In the Reformation, that they want to do away with tradition and just study the Bible, right? That's the evidence. We're going to remember that Luther's favorite philosopher was Occam, who's a nominalist. And nominalism is a precursor ultimately of empiricism and then positivism or realism. And the Enlightenment, of course, in the Enlightenment era, you have the radical empiricists, concluding with David Hume, the Scot David Hume, who says that all reality is known, or the only thing you can know is through your sense experience, and no two sense experiences, you can't prove any two sense experiences are even related. So life is just a series of disconnected sense experiences. Okay? So Hume is thought of as an Enlightenment thinker, the radical British empiricist, but that's a precursor of the 19th century positivism or realism. And vitalism, this idea of getting in touch with your dark mystical side, your animal nature, that has roots in Renaissance and Enlightenment occultism and Romanticism. Remember we talked about weeks ago, we talked about the Renaissance and their fascination with the occult, getting in touch with mystical dark power on the Jewish side of Kabbalah, and then in general with alchemy and the occult numerology and pseudo-mysticism of the Renaissance, some of the Renaissance people who are famous externally as philosophers and politicians and scientists, but on the inside or secretly they were occultists. Pico della Mirandola, Francis Bacon.
Newton.
Pardon me?
Newton.
Yeah. And well, Newton's an Enlightenment figure, but it's the same stuff.
He was into.
Yeah, part of the club, right? So, and Romanticism, in the early 19th century Romanticism, is this revolt against rationalism and empiricism, the desire to experience your emotions, experience your mystical connection with nature, and so forth. And but the Romantics are also tied in with various occult groups. Okay. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, for example. People like that. Okay. And destruction has its roots in all of these kinds of errors have their radicals, their extremists, and it all leads to destruction. So the destructive nihilism has its roots in the extreme forms of all of these errors, because they all lead to destruction. So to summarize the author's introduction, he finally finishes by saying, as Orthodox, we can't get caught up in any one of these stages. We have to see each one of them in the light of Orthodox truth. And that's his goal, to help us be critical of all these supposedly opposing schools of thought that all are really heads of the same hydra, and seeing it from our Orthodox vantage point. So in pages 23 to 33 in this second edition, he talks about what he calls the first stage of liberalism. And this is really a passive or supposedly neutral preparation for nihilism. It's the classical liberals, okay, going way back to the 17th and 18th century thinkers, the fathers of the political thought that gave birth to America, John Locke, people like that. And then in the 19th century, John Stuart Mill, these are icons for liberals, right? And who today are called American conservatives, but they're actually liberals. So they're a passive, neutral preparation for nihilism, for the destructive future, right? And they're so weak, they can't defend the Christian heritage they claim to believe in. They claim to believe in the Christian heritage. For example, there's a Jewish thinker named Leo Strauss. He's an idol for a lot of so-called conservatives. He claimed, and all of his followers claimed they want to preserve Christian civilization. Strauss himself said, "Hey, I admire Christian civilization," but he didn't believe in Christ. Okay. So they really don't have the spiritual power to defend this civilization against what's coming against it. Okay. So what is liberal truth? In 19th century classical liberalism, they claim to love Christian civilization, and they have vague ideas like eternal verities, eternal truths, great ideas, the great ideas, okay? The great conversation, so forth. But they don't believe in absolute truth. They're sophisticated people in the 19th century just couldn't believe in absolute or Christian truth. This is why, baptized, church-going Orthodox people in the 19th century would abhor the idea of their child becoming a monk. Well, how can you believe in those medieval superstitions? We're enlightened. How could you do that? There are so many examples. If you read lives of 19th century elders, our Holy Fathers say that most of them came from peasant or merchant class families, because all the aristocratic families and intellectuals were saying, that's all. Yeah, we're Orthodox because that's our national faith. That's part of our culture. But we don't really believe in all that, miracles and elders and confession and, come on, we're beyond that. We're too sophisticated to believe in that. But they were very patriotic. They considered themselves very loyal to the Orthodox Church. They wouldn't be anything else, you see. But they were denying the essence because they didn't believe in their actual revelation. They didn't believe in the actual tradition of the Church. But they had a lot of beautiful emotional ideas, our culture, our civilization, and so forth and so on, but without the absolute truth of the faith. So this kind of liberal loves the heritage of previous ages. Look how beautiful that church is. Listen how beautiful that chant is. I love my culture, you see. But they don't believe in the truth that created the culture, or the faith that created the culture. See? So they couldn't really defend it. They didn't have a spiritual power to defend it. They were just outwardly enjoying the fruits of hundreds of years of 2,000 years of faith, but without the faith. Okay? So who is this liberal God? We've talked about that liberal God before. It was deism, right? They adopted the deistic idea from the 18th century. The classical liberals or progressive Christians want to retain some idea of God, but not the personal, historical, revealed, demanding God of the Scriptures. For them, the real God for them is up front, too close, and also too great. He's all powerful, and he's right in your face. He's demanding something. And he interferes in history. He does things. He can raise the dead. That's the real God. They don't like that. They don't want that. They like Christian ideals. Care for the poor. How many times have you heard Orthodox who are Masons, say, how can you tell me I can't be a Mason? We care for the poor. We believe in Christian ideals. We're good people, right? They like Christian ideals, but without Christ. Their God is the deist God that does not work miracles or intervene in history or make demands. Their souls are dead from the loss of faith, even though these might be people who go to church every Sunday or every often. But they don't really believe. Their souls are dead from loss of faith. They like the outward trappings of the Christian heritage. They want to do good. Okay. A classic example of this is Arthur Balfour of the Balfour Declaration, that person. He was a British nobleman, or from a noble family, from one of the most famous noble families, the Cecil family. And he wrote a defense of the Christian faith. And he also insisted, he was a wealthy man who had, obviously, he did practice a lot of hospitality, had big house parties at his country home and townhomes and so forth. And he insisted that his guests gather every day for morning and evening prayer, according to the Anglican prayer book. But his defense of the Christian faith was completely on rational or rationalistic grounds, because he assumed that neither he nor anyone he knew could believe in the revealed faith. See, he loved the culture that Christianity produced, but he didn't believe in Christianity itself. Okay. The religion of man. So their God is weaker than the men who invented him. The men who invented him are doing things. They're building bridges. They're building orphanages. They're bringing indoor plumbing to the Africans, or whatever it may be. They're doing things, right? But their God is this far-off philosophical first cause out in La La Land somewhere. So the atheists point this out. They said, your God is a joke. You have no apology for your God. You have no philosophical, no theological argument for your God. You're hypocrites. So a lot of the Marxist zeal of destruction was aimed at these hypocritical liberals. See, the useful idiots who prepared the way for the destruction that was to come. There's a character, I think his name is Stepan Trofimovich, something like that. I forget the name of the character, but there's a character in The Demons. Is it Stepan Trofimovich, something like that? Where he's the 1860s liberal, and he thinks that these young men admire him, but they don't, because they've gone beyond him. They see that his liberal faith is silly and weak and useless, and they're the real thing. They're going to take this whole rejection of orthodoxy to its logical extreme. There's a sad scene where he just kind of walks off into the distance and disappears, and it's an image of the defeat of liberalism by more radical Marxism. Okay. So their God is weak, and the atheists point this out, and they can't defend their so-called God and their so-called Christian civilization from the radical nihilists. Okay. In Orthodoxy, and paragraphs 7 to 13 identify as his examining the question of immortality versus earthly utopia. In Orthodoxy, everything is judged in light of eternity. Death, judgment, heaven and hell, those are real. Right? That's how we judge everything. But in liberalism, whether of the Christian variety or over just humanism, everything is judged in light of a so-called salvation, which makes life better in this world. This world is all there is. When I used to, my secular job years ago, and I used to give advice to young people about college and career, they would always say, I want to make the world a better place. This has become like a mantra or some kind of a truism.
Also looks good on the resume.
Let's go to the resume. So the liberal idea of salvation is to make the world a better place, because this world is all there is. So a liberal Christian, a progressive Christian, may speak of heaven. Oh, he's gone to heaven now. He's not in pain anymore. So that kind of thing. It's in vague, sentimental, a carnal way, nothing serious. Unfortunately, a lot of Orthodox people think this way. You go to an Orthodox funeral, and it's rare to meet people who are really talking about, we need to pray for his soul, the toll houses, God's judgment, heaven and hell. It's all, oh, well, he's out of pain now, and now he sees his grandma in heaven, and this kind of vague, sentimental, Hallmark Channel approach. And it's really scary when you see lots of Orthodox people talking like this. And if you talk about, well, we need to pray for his soul, maybe he isn't saved, they're offended. It's like, how could you say that? How could you?
Superficial.
It's superficial. Yeah, it's humanistic. It's superficial. So sentimental kind of. They say they believe in heaven and hell, but it's really this kind of childish, just angels on clouds with harps or something like that. Nothing serious. And everybody goes there. I remember I read the results of a survey. It said 95% of Americans believe in hell, but only 5% believe they can go there. See, so it's nothing serious. So the liberal Christian may speak about heaven, but it's just some vague, sentimental thing. The outright humanist, who doesn't claim to be a Christian, does not speak of immortality or heaven. This life is all there is. But he still may like so-called Christian ideals, right? The humanist Stoic, they want to do his duty. Remember, in Stoicism, you do your duty, even though things are not going to go well, but you do your duty. And be moral. But his metaphysics is so thin, he has no philosophy really to back it up. Certainly no theology to back it up. So he really can't say why he wants it, or where duty comes from, or why he wants to do it. Right? So outright nihilism easily defeats this position as well. Okay. So the liberal wants to lead a civilized life in this world. The apex of this outlook you could see in Victorian England. Right? They're so wealthy. And they've got so much. They've got all this centuries, the result of centuries and centuries of a Christian civilization behind them, and they're all comfortable, and they're all wealthy, and they're conquering the world, and they're bringing indoor plumbing to the Africans, and suits and ties to the Chinese instead of their little robes, and they're making the world a better place, right? And they want to defend the structures and values of the old culture, but they really have no defense. It's all very thin. It's going to fall like that, like a house of cards. Because as Ivan Karamazov says, if there is no immortality, all things are lawful. That's toward the beginning of Brothers Karamazov. You meet Ivan, and he's recently had a triumph. He's published an article that proposes that if there's no immortality, all things are lawful. And he's right. Okay. So the irony is that when liberals have created their utopia, by the 19th century they've created their utopia. They've liberated men from the church, from the monks, from the rules, and so forth. And they're creating universal suffrage and a full belly for everyone. And they're liberating men from the old constraints of family, of church, of society, and so forth. But by getting rid of all of these defenses for the so-called individual, what they've done is they've opened it up to the nihilists who are going to come in and destroy this beautiful liberal paradise with their monstrous violence, their experiments on people, their torturing and killing millions and millions and millions of people. The liberals paved the way for this. In Russia, it was very obvious. You can just see it. The liberals take over the Duma, the parliament. They do a coup. They overthrow the Tsar. The liberals overthrow the Tsar. It wasn't Bolsheviks who got rid of the Tsar. It was Masons and liberals in the aristocracy, in the court, in the general staff who got rid of the Tsar. And in a few months, the Bolsheviks could just walk in and take it over because it had no spiritual power, had no strength. We see this repeated in all of our Orthodox countries where they let in the liberal ideas, They get rid of the church's influence. They neutralize the church by neutralizing the monasteries. And they take over the education away from the monasteries, and the education goes to the secularists. And then they say, well, we believe in orthodoxy, we love orthodoxy, we're patriotic, blah, 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 but they have no spiritual power. So when the real revolutionaries come, they have no defense. They just wipe them out. There's no immune system. Okay. So the new man produced by liberalism sees through the illusion of liberalism. They don't believe in it. It's ridiculous, right? Father Seraphim in paragraphs 14 through 17 talks about hierarchy versus egalitarianism. In the Christian order, politics are based on absolute truth because all authority is from God. We talked about this at length, right, in our course on Christian politics. This creates a monarchy and a hierarchical society. But in the liberal order, authority is from the people. Remember, the sovereign will of the people. If there's a monarchy, what's a constitutional monarchy? Yeah, we have a king, and we have the church, but they're for show.
Figurative.
Yeah, they're figureheads. It's nice on a national holiday. We like to have the king. We have the patriarch come out and bless everybody, but it's a beautiful show, right? In liberal Christianity, God is a constitutional monarch too. He rules by if we let him, right? We'll vote for God. We'll vote for what kind of God we want. As in other areas, the liberal compromise is weak. It's unstable. You either believe authority comes from God or you don't, right? But if you try to create this hybrid, hermaphroditic arrangement, it doesn't stand up. So the liberals always try to appease the revolution. That's a mark of a liberal. They're always appeasing the destroyers. And the revolution's always making no compromises. The real revolutionaries make no compromise. They're not interested in compromise. Okay. We can see this, for example, the weaklings in the so-called American conservatives. They're always trying to appease the leftists because that's what they do. That's what they do.
Different face of
it's just a controlled opposition. Right? So what is the root of liberalism? And Father Seraphim identifies it very easily. It's worldliness. It's just worldliness. The liberal is oblivious to the total inadequacy of his position. He doesn't care about ultimate questions. He may be a person, again, talk about a 19th century Anglican or Lutheran or Catholic, or unfortunately a 19th century Orthodox aristocrat or intellectual who goes to church, but he doesn't ultimately care about his soul because he's worldly. He's enjoying this world too much. That's all he cares about. He wants to preserve a Christian culture, but he doesn't believe in Christ. So he can only preserve this thing for a short time. It doesn't last very long because there's no defense against revolution. So he's a contented, stupid sheep until the moment they come to take him to the guillotine or the gulag. Right. In paragraphs 31 to 33, he deals with the question of violent re-education versus subtle re-education. Okay. Nietzsche says there's no why. He asks the ultimate question. He gives the answer. Boom. That's the radical nihilists. They ask ultimate questions, and they give their answer. It's a bad answer, but they're asking the ultimate question. The liberals don't want to deal with ultimate questions. They just want to deal with what we're going to have for dinner today, or how to build a better mousetrap. Right? The nihilist destructive regimes re-educate their populations quickly and brutally. That's what we saw in communism. Right? You kill lots of people, put in a total new system, and brutally re-educate the people by torturing them and drugging them and so forth and so on. The liberal regimes re-educate gradually. So we can say, well, in America, in Britain, or say in France since 1800, we haven't had violent revolution. We've had gentle revolution. We gradually re-educate. And so the liberals, in education, liberals are the best allies of the nihilists because they gradually, nicely re-educate everybody into rejection of God. So they quietly, gradually. So in the Orthodox countries, they had to take people from Orthodoxy and just brutalize them and kill them and torture them and then put them in classes 24 hours a day about Marxism and Darwin and all this stuff. Okay, the class struggle and all that nonsense, right? In America, they didn't have to. They did it much more gradually, right? Without killing millions of people. Okay, that's the liberal method, but it ends up with people who think, well, this is something nice. They didn't realize they've been. I mean, at least in communism, you realize that you were being tortured. But here, they don't even realize, right, that they're being re-engineered. They're being re-educated. And Father Seraphim links us to the corruption of academia. This is a theme in his biography, where he talked when he was a young man, he was just appalled by the corruption. Now, think, he was in college in the 1940s and 50s. Well, what would he think now? The corruption in the universities. Universities are a complete, joke. I mean, the corruption is so outrageous that they're not even ashamed of it anymore. So it also the corruption of academia. The university system, which was born in the West in the Middle Ages, monks created it originally, but then gradually it was taken over by more and more disbelieving people, more and more materialistic, more and more skeptical, more and more unbelieving, and finally today it's just a madhouse. Academia, the scientific establishment and academia in general, is a madhouse. Okay. And he's identifying this back in 1962 when he's writing this book. So you can imagine what he would think now, what goes on in universities. So to summarize liberalism, paragraphs 34 and 35, the liberal is a man who has lost his faith, but he wants the outward cultural fruits of faith. He likes his beautiful traditional architecture and his beautiful traditional music and his beauty of his nation's literature, and he's a patriot and he's a churchman. He loves all this. Well, it might be a churchman somewhere, but he loves the culture, right? But he doesn't believe in the faith that created the culture. He wants the prestige of truth without paying the price of believing in truth.
One tool is opera.
Oh, opera, yes. Opera is an earlier form of initiation into the diabolical. Now, we have more advanced forms now. The rock concert, the pro football game, these are Dionysiac bacchanalian initiations. They're psyops. They're ritual transformations of people into a Dionysian or a demonic, frenzied personality, fragmented personality, addicted personality, right? Opera is an older, more sophisticated,
More powerful.
well, more powerful for an intelligent person, right? Because people then were much more intelligent, right? They couldn't take them from chant to rock, right? They had to do these stages in between. You can see, and in opera, you can see the progression opera. The earliest operas, say Monteverdi, they're more stylized. They're much less carnal. They're more Baroque opera is very staid in a sense. It's very calm. But by the time you get to the 19th century opera, and then especially the Wagnerian opera is really an initiation into an entire demonic mythological universe. It's kind of amazing stuff. And if you, I was taking musicology in college, and my professor, who was a Benedictine monk, who actually loved Gregorian chant, and he was very suspicious of Wagner. He says, well, notice this gigantic orchestra and these amazing, these frequent modulations from one key to another that you hear in Wagner. Wagner greatly increased the size of the orchestra. So it has this incredible power of this great 100, 110, 120 piece orchestra. And the constant switching from one key to another, and constant chromaticism, where he's always on the edge of breaking traditional tonality. It's right on the edge of modern music. Okay? And it's very, very powerful. That's why, I know young Orthodox people, especially men like Wagner, so young Orthodox men who like Wagner, I say, you got to be careful. But with all opera, and of course, Italian opera is not as obviously powerful, but it's very sensuous. So it traps people in a dreamland of carnality, romanticism, eroticism, sensuality. There's in the life of the elder Varnava of Optina. He didn't enter the monastery until he was 46, and he was a cavalry officer, and he was also from a well-placed family. So he went to operas, he went to balls, all that kind of thing. He remembers a turning point in his life, where it was the eve of St. Nicholas Day, and he went to an opera. And he was sitting there saying, what am I doing here? And he never went to one again. He realized that it's either the opera or the vigil for St. Nicholas. I can't. These are two different worlds, two different allegiances. And opera is an earlier, by today's standards, opera seems so conventional. It seems so passé, conservative. But if you're a 19th century person, opera is a very powerful substitute for the church. Theater and opera became a substitute for the church.
Now it's sports.
Now it's that's too sophisticated. Now it's stupid stuff like pro football or whatever, rock concerts.
What's something else? Robotics.
Pardon?
Robotics.
They're getting obsessed with it. Yeah.
Because it's like you create beings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but it's just manipulation of phenomena.
So we push it.
It's not wisdom. It's just cleverness. Yes. So the liberal wants the prestige of truth without believing in truth, and ultimately, of course, this is suicidal. Ultimately, it's suicidal. It consumes itself. Right? There's no spirit. It consumes all the spiritual capital, and there's nothing left. And the liberal appeases the revolution, gives way to it step by step, till finally there's nothing left. The next stage is realism. We talked about this realism last time as scientism. So realism, the realists say, oh, you liberals, you have all your phony ideals about mankind and love and justice. You can't prove these things. Those things are out in the air somewhere, right? They're fairy tales. We just want the facts. If you can't prove it in a test tube, it's not real. Okay? So realism is another form for dogmatic materialism, which later became the philosophical school of so-called positivism. Turgenev. Turgenev is a mid-19th century Russian author. His novels are very depressing. Unless you really need to, I wouldn't read Turgenev. Wouldn't go on my way to read Turgenev. Turgenev is sort of Balzac without redemption. The darkness of Balzac without redemption is Turgenev. But this realism is what Turgenev calls nihilism. It's a crude, stupid materialism. We will find the salvation of man in dissecting frogs. Right? Remember Solofiev's joke. We're descended from monkeys, therefore we'll love each other. Right? It's ridiculous. Okay. We went to Boganet. Yuri Gagarin went to space and didn't see God. Right? So there's no God. All right. The kind of stuff you're taught when you're a good little communist, and you're taught this kind of thing, which everybody saw through. Obviously, very few people really believed in it. Right? But some people do believe in this. So it's a reduction of everything higher to the lower. It's reductionism, radical materialistic reductionism. But it seems to the 19th century materialists, they felt they were a breath of fresh air. They got rid of all those cobwebs of liberal double talk about ideals and Christian civilization and love and justice and all that stuff. They have a brutal, straightforward answer to everything, no matter how crude. We're descended from monkeys. Everything's material. You don't have a mind, you just have a brain. That kind of thing. So the liberal is vague about ultimate things. He doesn't like to deal with it. The realist is childishly and idiotically naive. He takes on the question, are there ultimate things? No. He answers the question. No. We're just piles of molecules. Okay.
You know what they say when the peasant goes to the zoo and sees the giraffe?
Yeah.
They say, this thing doesn't exist.
This doesn't exist. As we pointed out last week, the position of materialism is self-contradiction. It's based on two assumptions. All truth is empirical, and all truth is relative. But all truth is empirical is itself a metaphysical statement. It can't be proved empirically, right? And all truth is relative is itself an absolute statement. It's not a relative statement, right? So this position is self-evidently absurd. But why do people believe it? Lots of people believe this. They watch Bill Nye the Science Guy, right? Or they watched, back in the 70s, we're all watching Carl Sagan, right? We all believed in this. Okay? It's the naive, and Father Seraphim puts as he often does, he puts his finger on it. It's the naive, undisciplined thought of the practical man. I'm a practical man. I don't have time to think about God and all that stuff. I just want the facts. I'm a hard-headed guy. I just want the facts. And and one might add, the extroverted modern man, the American character, which is now the character throughout the whole world, right? What we call the American character of the busy, extroverted guy who's accomplished things and making money and starting a business and building buildings and doesn't have time to fool around with stuff like philosophy and music and all that. He's a practical guy. That, and I might add as a Southerner, the Yankee ideal, not all Americans, but the Yankee, the Northern American, the big city American who's making things happen, right? This ideal has been exported now to the whole world. Everybody thinks that's the way to be, right?
Remember what the owner of this building said to me?
Oh, yes.
The hell was Greek
To hell with Greek philosophy, right? He's a practical man. Yes, and actually he's made his fortune. That man has made his fortune in high tech.
She stole it from NASA.
Oh, did he? That's interesting. Okay, so the materialist, the Joe materialist on the street who believes Bill Nye the Science Guy is an extroverted modern guy he's always busy and he's too busy to think. He's too busy to think. Now I'm talking about the productive. I'm not talking about the ones who are just addicted to video games. They're beyond. They can't think at all. I'm talking about the productive, good citizen, right? Who's a businessman and gives money to the Lions Club and so forth and so on. He's busy. He's productive. He just wants the facts, ma'am, just the facts. He's too busy to think. So he's one who swallows this kind of stuff, listens to Ira Flato on Friday afternoons on NPR and learns the latest that science has told us about the ultimate meaning of everything. Okay. Now the question is this scientism, can we call it nihilism? They say they believe in something, not nothing, right? So is it really nihilism? Let's answer the question. Father Seraphim answers the question. I'm going to quote Father Seraphim now word for word. Paragraph 4 of section 2. These are his exact words. If truth is, in the highest sense, knowledge of the beginning and end of things, of the dimension of the absolute, and if nihilism is the doctrine that there is no such truth, then it is clear that those who take scientific knowledge for the only truth and deny what lies above it are nihilists in the exact sense of that term. That's why Turgenev called them nihilists. Because to deny ultimate truth, to deny metaphysical truth, truth beyond what you can see, touch, and so forth, is to deny truth. So by Nietzsche's own definition, they are nihilists. Okay. It's the presumption of the fragment to replace the whole. When we were studying Weaver and talking about fragmentation. They think that if you study the fragments, you're more knowledgeable than the one who claimed to study the whole.
Because he doesn't know the particulars.
Yeah, because he doesn't know the particulars, yeah. So it's a Tower of Babel of facts, trying to reach what is above from what is below. We don't believe anything above. We're going to gather all these facts, and we're going to gradually build our Tower of Babel and reach the heavens. Okay. It's like it's related to the idea that you can get man out of a monkey, right? We can start with a protozoan, and it becomes a human. At some point, it becomes a human being. The non-rational can produce the rational. The lower produces the higher, right? It's self-evidently absurd, but it is their position. Okay, they pretend to be humble. We're just humble. We don't have any presuppositions. We just study the facts. We need to be humble, and this is just reality. We just go where the truth leads us. They're not really humble. They claim to replace God.
Stupid.
Well, they are stupid, and they're proud. They claim that they're replacing God in divine revelation. They're the new high priests. Right? St. Basil, speaking of the Greek philosophers who denied God, the Greek scientists who denied God, said, their terrible condemnation will be the greater. For all this worldly wisdom, yeah, they've collected all these facts, their PhDs, they've done all their studies, right? Since seeing so clearly into vain sciences, they have willfully shut their eyes to the knowledge of the truth. They don't want to know the truth.
Is it voluntarily or it's just...
Well, the human being is a very complicated thing. The human heart is very deep. You don't know. It'd be very hard to dissect every man's motivations.
Is the influence of evil men?
Well, by now it's just they're just raised that way. Okay, so you have this smart boy. He works really hard in high school to study, get good grades in science and math. He gets a scholarship to U of M, or Michigan State, or MIT, and they just brainwash him into this worldview. But he's spending so much time. He's got to spend so many hours. He's exhausted. he's spending 18 hours a day in the lab to produce some paper, to make his professor happy, also to make his professor money, by the way. And he's too exhausted, and besides that, he's running around with girls, he's addicted to his computer, he's drinking, all these things are going on, so all thought of God is driven from his mind. He can't, and so he's not disposed to being philosophical or theological because he's disposed to just being curious about physical things or math formulas.
There's no end to that.
And your curiosity can lead you to an endless exploration of these phenomena. And you can become famous. You can write papers, and you can patent an invention, and you can be Bill Nye the Science Guy. Well, actually, those guys are too smart to be Bill Nye. But you can become well known in your field, but be so obsessed with the little fragments in your field, you can never look up to see the big picture. Because you're so busy, and you're under so much pressure to produce, and you've got some boss. I think I told you about our friend, the postdoc at U of M. She had this boss, and he drove them so hard because he was a rainmaker. He made a lot of money for the university, getting big grants. And he used these kids like slaves. And he said, I won't be happy until you not only know, you don't know what time it is, I'll be happy when you don't know what day it is. He had them working in a windowless lab. These were kids with PhDs from good families. Okay. So he's destroying their minds, right. Now, she is a daughter of a priest. She is very prayerful. It didn't destroy her, but she has no illusions about that worldview.
She's seeing.
Pardon me?
She's seeing.
Oh yeah, she saw it from her Orthodox lens, and she saw how meaningless, and the whole thing is, yeah. So the realist is distinguished from the liberal by his religious zeal. It's more of they're fanatics. They have this zeal for what they think is the truth. But the liberal is indifferent to truth. The liberal just wants to, get up and have his tea and crumpets and go see the ruins of a cathedral or something. But these people, they love their truth. I'll dissect the frog and I'll solve the problems of mankind. So this scientism becomes a crusade against the frivolity of liberalism. It becomes a quest for ultimate truth. We're going to, get down to the ultimate truth through studying science. But this realist, ultimately, despite his claimed love for the truth, does not really deserve our sympathy. Because behind it all is what's behind it all. They can't see this because they don't have grace. They don't have orthodoxy. But they don't realize what's behind it is their love for power. Right? What's behind this whole scientism? Desire to manipulate nature. Remember, going back to Francis Bacon and New Atlantis, this whole project of manipulating nature through technology, ultimately why? To have power over other people. Right? So it's a parody of the Christian love of the truth. So in paragraphs 9 through 11, Father Seraphim talks about the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. They take this brutal scientism to the logical extreme. They create these scientific social engineering programs. We're going to scientifically re-engineer everybody. We're going to kill the unfit. We're going to kill all the retarded kids. We're going to, or in Soviet Union, we're going to kill the unproductive classes, right? And re-engineer everybody on the basis of science. In Russia, nauka, on the basis of science. We're going to re-engineer everyone. So the ideas of Marx and Darwin and Freud, which are actually very unscientific, they're very stupid, right? But they become the philosophical underpinnings of the scientific social engineering.
I wouldn't say they're stupid.
Oh, they're diabolical. No, they're not simply stupid. They're actually they're diabolically clever. But they are stupid in the sense that they don't make sense. No, but they're very clever. No, because only demons could have invented these ideas. Whether it's Marx or Darwin or Freud, only demons. The human mind, unaided by some diabolical influence, can have such clever, sophisticated thought systems for making human beings accept completely untrue propositions.
It's a whole system.
Yeah, it's a system trapping people in right. So the multitudes may object to the excesses. Well, I don't want you to take away my cow. Oh, how dare you torture my son or whatever. But they have no defense because they share the philosophical assumptions with their torturers. They're all being materialists together. Like Arthur Kessler writes this book, Darkness at Noon, criticizing the Stalinists for killing the old Bolsheviks. Well, why shouldn't they kill them? What difference does it make? There's no God. Right? Ivan Karamazov said there's no immortality, so all things are lawful. Why shouldn't Stalin kill all the Jewish Bolsheviks? Why not? You see, so they eat each other because they all share the same philosophical assumptions, even if they may occasionally object to the excesses of the regime.
They're against themselves.
When it comes to them, yes. When it's their neighbor, they don't care. But when it's themselves, suddenly they become dissidents, right? So finally, realism is part of the spirit of this age. Even the idealistic humanists and liberals have accommodated realism. Even the so-called liberals who believe in the good of mankind and higher values they still believe in Darwinism, and they still believe that we're really just atoms, right? For example, all the professors of the humanities, all the defenders of humanities have all caved in and given in to the idea that we need quantitative methods, so-called pseudoscientific methods for the humanities, which is self-evidently untrue, right? So this article about Charles Dickens is more true because I've got this quantitative analysis of how many times they use a certain verb or something like that. You see, it's absurd. Okay, and the cynical tone of all of our humanists today, everyone involved in so-called humanities, literature, history, and also the social sciences, they've all been indoctrinated into this materialism. Right. So the function of liberalism, going back to liberalism now, to recap, the function of liberalism was to obscure the higher truths concerning God and the spiritual life. Let's make it vague. Yeah, we believe in God, but not too much. Let's make it vague and talk about Christian ideals, and we love Christ, but we don't really believe in this miracle, and blah, blah, blah. Making everything very vague. The function of liberals was to make things vague. The function of the realism of scientism was to annihilate truth. Liberals make truth vague. Materialists annihilate it. And they're all heading towards this goal of the new man, right? The liberals want to create the new man, the liberated man who can vote and have his rights and all that kind of thing. And the scientistic people want to create literally create the new man with their scientific methods. But of course, what they're really creating is a subhuman or a monster. So the next stage we're going to talk about next week next week we want to talk about vitalism and the destructive stage of nihilism.